Hello there, welcome back to The Closet Historian. We're back in the sewing room today for another project. This one was another one that I promised in my fall and winter sewing plans video. I promised I would show you all how I made this skirt. I've had so many questions about this suit here on the channel, or this little set, the Bolero and skirt, especially the skirt. People seem really interested in this, and luckily it is a very easy pattern modification to make, so I'll be showing you how I make this style of skirt here today on the channel, and then also I will be showing you how I make a new Bolero to match it as well. I like having these little Bolero suits. Although Boleros are not the easiest thing to pattern and fit on my body shape, I think. I just have a little bit more to work around, I feel, compared to some of the vintage Bolero styles and patterns and things that I've seen. I will put some of those on the screen here now so you can see the sort of suits that were inspiring me when I first made something like this several years ago now. This one is actually a polyester, I think poly rayon blend from Joann's. I don't think this fabric is available anymore, but it was for a very long time. I was originally planning to make this again out of the black and white houndstooth because it was available once upon a time at Joann's, but I ended up getting a suiting wool from moodfabrics.com. That is my favorite place to shop for like more luxurious fabrics, by the way. Moodfabrics.com never has led me astray. Even if something arrives and it's a little bit different than I thought, it's usually nicer. So that's always a nice surprise. If it's going to be something different, I would rather it be even nicer than I was expecting. That's a good kind of surprise. My original inspiration for making a skirt like this one actually wasn't vintage inspirations at all. It was actually Alexander McQueen and a couple of his like 2006 through 2008 shows, which was when I was really into fashion anyway. It's when I was, obsessed with high fashion, I should say, or got really interested in runway fashion, which I no longer follow as closely as I did back then. But then back in that kind of era, 2006 to 2009, was a really good time for runway fashion as far as it looked quite 1940s and 50s inspired. Mad Men was going on. I think there was a lot of influences converging together to make that runway fashion a lot more vintage inspired. So it was the perfect time for me to discover high fashion. Unfortunately, high fashion moved on and I stayed in the vintage eras it was playing with and just got more and more involved in that. But, it's all right. We all find our style one way or another, and that was kind of my introduction to vintage, was leaning into vintage from modern fashion at the time. But this skirt was inspired by Alexander McQueen's kind of shapes and silhouettes. I'll put some images here of suits that were generally floating around my mind of things that I kind of wanted to have for myself, and ended up making this little Bolero suit instead. This set, and particularly the skirt, has been really quite highly requested here on the channel. Anytime this little houndstooth version has appeared in a video, people have asked me about it. So I'm excited to share with you just how simple it is to make this kind of modification to a skirt pattern to have this little side drape situation going on. I think probably the most difficult part of this particular project today is actually the sleeves, because I added some pleating detailing to these sleeves here. But other than that, it's actually quite simple to make all these modifications, so I will jump on over to the blue patterning table of doom as usual, and we can get started making this pattern. All right, here we are. Here is the photo again of this suit that you see sitting here on the table, actually. I don't actually have the pattern for this suit anymore. I think it's so old that it got retired out of my patterning stash here, but I will just remake a new pattern for it. You can see what the skirt looks like laid out. So you can see this is just the basic pencil skirt with a huge godet, or like angled section sewn in to the side of it. So the reason that this is this way is because when I made this skirt, I made it with a slight flare to just the back piece. You'll see here, there's no seam on the back, so I added this much flare to the back, sewed this to this side seam here, and I was like, well, that's a little bit of flare, but I want more. So I ended up taking that apart and adding in this big godet here. I guess that's what it would be, this big triangle section. So today, instead of having this seam, I'll just draft this pattern piece like so we don't have to have this seam down here in the front of the skirt. And instead we will have a seam along here. But I might actually offset it again like this one is. You can see the seams in the back. So that one side, like the front, is a little bit bigger than the back, so that when this hangs down, the seam isn't down the center of a fold here. Hopefully you'll see what I mean when we get to that. But in general, this is what the skirt looks like, and I'll just be redrafting that today because I don't have this pattern kicking around anymore. But again, it is just the basic pencil skirt with a big addition, so that will be an easy one for us. So my original version of this, like houndstooth version of this little set, has just a regular puff sleeve in it. But today I think I'm going to try and do a more interesting, like 30s kind of sleeve with a smooth cap, I can talk, at the shoulder, and then a bit of a flared, like balloon-ish shape over the elbow, and then comes to like a 3/4, narrows in past the elbow for more of like a 3/4 kind of lantern-ish sleeve. There's some really interesting sleeves going on in the 1930s, so you can kind of get creative and do lots of different stuff. So this is what we're going to be making today, and I'm going to get started actually. Should we start with the Bolero or the skirt? Because the skirts are so easy. All right, we'll start with the Bolero. I'm actually going to be referencing the Bolero I made for my Star Wars Rebel jacket that I made, so if you liked that, it's going to be a very similar patterning process today to get from the sloper to a little Bolero jacket. So I'm going to start with changing the front bodice into this little Bolero, front and back of course, and then we will do modifications for the sleeve, and then we'll move on to the skirt after that. So let's start by getting out the basic bodice pattern as usual and tracing a copy in pattern paper. Alright, so as usual I am just tracing a copy of my front bodice block, and again as usual I will remind you all that this is just black poster board, nothing fancy. I like to transfer my block sloper often used patterns, or like the patterns I use the most, onto a thicker card paper. This one's just poster board, just so I can easily trace them whenever I need. So I have a tracing of the front here. Then I also have gone ahead and traced a copy of my back bodice block as well. So I just have a front and a back on alphanumeric dot paper here. I will link this paper in the description as well, because I do get questions about it. So I just traced it front and back here. I'm just drawing in the darts and any relevant information I will need. And then I've pulled out the pattern that I used to make the Rebel jacket for that Star Wars lookbook video I did in December, because I liked the way that that Bolero fit on me, and therefore I'm going to be using the same sort of modifications today, but I will be walking you through them. So from the basic bodice block here, what has changed for this mostly is, of course, it's shortened a bit. I did add a little bit of ease here into the side seam, and then instead of having one waist dart, I split it into two. So we'll be doing that today. Not much else changes up here. Of course, for my Bolero I'll be making today, we're going to go ahead and round this off here and round off this bottom edge here as well, so we have this rounded sort of front situation. But I'm going to keep the same darts. I have often trouble with the fit of Boleros on me. I don't know if it's just because, like, a lot of the Bolero patterns I've seen, vintage ones, I'll put a few here, seem to have like one dart, or some even have no darts. And I think if you are, you know, less, as they say, well endowed, as it were, this works. But for me, dealing with a double D bust on a Bolero can be annoying sometimes. So splitting the darts into 3 darts instead of 2, I think helped with the fit on my last one, so that's what I'm going to be doing again today. But Boleros are not my strongest suit, I should say. Not, you know, excuse the pun, but I'm not super confident with them, but I like the way this last one I made looked, so I'm going to go with the same similar modifications for this. But I'm not a Bolero expert, as it were. Although I'm not an expert in most things, but I shall pretend to be for the, you know, sake of the channel. And then for the back pattern piece, the only modifications I made was I raised the back neck a little bit, just because the one in my bodice block is quite low anyway. Again, added that same little bit of ease into the side seam, and then of course it's shortened a little bit as well. I like to make my Boleros pretty long, just like hovering above the waistline, so you just have this little peak of smaller-ish waist compared to Bolero, but of course I don't make it that much larger. But we will go ahead and take these tracings and cut them out, and then I will show you how to split that waist dart into 2. Now I know we have done a lot of dart manipulation already here on the channel, but I'm going to be going over it again yet today, so I'll put a time marker to skip this splitting of these 2 darts if it's something you want to skip ahead on. But for those of you who are, you know, still new to dart manipulation, here's how we're going to do it again today. So I have my waist dart here on the front bodice pattern piece, and I've just drawn a line up from the dart leg to the apex point here, and then I'm going to draw another line from the apex point to where I want another dart. So I'm going to open one kind of angled going like this. So we have 2 darts down here at the waist. So I'm going to draw another line from the apex down to where I want it. I've just kind of chosen. You can swing darts from the apex anywhere you want. If I wanted to swing all this fullness into another side dart, I could. If I wanted to swing it up into the neck, into the front, you can swing them anywhere you want. But I'm just going to go ahead and draw a line here and choose just a mark here. Draw another line there, and then I will go ahead and slash with my scissors through each of these marks here. So I've taken my scissors and I've slashed up to the apex through that line from the dart point and through where I want that new dart to be. But I just haven't sliced all the way through so that I can swing this around. So now we can pivot. So this is our original dart fullness here. So I'm going to go ahead and split that fullness between these 2 darts. So I'm going to swing this basically half closed here. So this will be the new dart here at this line, and this open area will be the new dart. So normally when you're moving a dart, you close it all the way, and so I've just moved that dart from here to here. But I want to keep the part of the original dart and add a new one. So I'm not going to use all of the fullness. I'm just going to use half of it. So I will go ahead and tape along here and then fill in this space, and then we will have 2 darts down here at the waist. So I've gone ahead and just kind of redrawn so you can see the new 2 darts. So there's this dart, that's the remaining half of this first one, and then the new dart that's opened up in here. Again, you're going to want to come down from your apex. I think I'm coming out like an inch these days. It's just what I'm preferring. I think the official recommendation is 1/2 inch to 5/8 down from the or away from the apex, because unless you want something super pointy and Madonna-tastic, in which case go ahead, go all the way to the apex if you would like to take people's eyes out, as it were. It is a 50s look, go for it. So I've just come down and then redrawn in these new dart legs to this edge here. Now, of course, this is a really wonky bottom edge now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this dart closed, fullness pointing towards the center, along how it would be sewn. And then I'm just going to cut off the excess down here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I will show you what that looks like. Alright, so I've just sliced off the excess from both of these darts by folding the way the dart will be, and then just cutting off the excess paper that was hanging off. So now they have the correct little pointed shapes going on here. So now I have my 2 darts at the waist. Of course, this is still the full length of the bodice, so I'm going to go ahead and shorten this, but I'll decide that after I draw in my front curves here. So I know I want to curve off this edge, so I'm just going to come in here and draw a curve, and then I'm going to curve down. I'll probably come in a little bit on the neckline because we don't need it right up to my neck, as it were. So I'll probably come in, let's say 5/8 from the edge, and then curve that area into this front too. So I'll take a little section off here, and then I will take a little corner off here. And I'm just going to be drawing those curves in. You could use something like a French curve too. These are relatively inexpensive kind of ruler to pick up. You can get them on Amazon or at fabric stores, probably even in like the drafting or drawing areas of a craft store as well, or a drafting kind of store, or framing places sometimes have craft supplies. Most craft places should have French curve rulers. So you can use one of these to do your curves along those edges if you want a very exact curve. I'll probably just sketch mine in because it doesn't really matter if it's perfect or not. Okay, so I've just gone ahead and sliced off this to curve it into the center front. Basically, this is still where the center front line is. You can see it curved off into nothing, so it still meets the center front, but of course, because this won't be cut on the fold, this will be a 1/2 inch in because of my 1/2 inch seam allowance, so that won't fully meet in the middle. There should be an inch gap if the Bolero was hanging perfectly and I didn't move at all or anything, which is never happens. I don't stand like a statue often. But so I just went ahead and did this top curve here, and then down here along this edge I just cut off a curve as well. I did leave myself a little bit of space between where the dart ends and where this curve begins, just because this is again going to be coming in that 1/2 inch, and I want to keep, I don't know, a tiny bit of flat space here before it hits to the dart. I don't know why I feel like that's necessary, but that's my intuition, and so that's what I'm going to be doing. But now I have the curved edge here of my Bolero on my pattern. Again, we still need to come up a little bit because it's still full length or to the waist right now. Of course, it would be, again, a 1/2 inch above that very waistline again, because if I were not sewing this to a skirt, I still have a 1/2 inch seam allowance in here. You know what I mean. But the next thing I'm going to do is actually I'm going to come down a little bit on the armhole and just open up and lower this armhole just a little bit. That way it's not so tight, just because this is technically an outerwear garment, or like something that would be worn over something else. I want a little bit more space underneath my arm. I don't want it to come up too high into my armpit. I just want a little bit more space here for comfort. So I'm going to come down a 1/2 inch, and I'm just going to ease this into the armhole, and take that little piece off. What we're going to do then is measure this line, the new one, and see how different it is from the original. So measure the original perhaps first, and then measure the new one. And if it's only like 1/8 of an inch difference, then we won't have to really adjust the sleeve because of the ease that is, it should be inherent in your sleeve pattern. That little bit of a difference should be no problem, and it should be able to account for that. So we'll see how that goes, and I will get back to you. Okay, so I've just drawn that in here, and I'm just going to go ahead and clip that off, and then I will of course have to do that same modification to the back as well, but we'll get to that in a minute. After all that talking about down here, I am going to of course clip off a little bit because I'm going to shorten this. So I'm going to shorten it about an inch along the side seam here, come up from the waist about an inch here, and then just smooth that into here. Well, you know what, actually, because I'm actually only going to come up a ½ inch here, because I want it to be an inch shorter, but then I won't have to attach seam allowance again. You know what I'm saying? Like on my one for the Rebel jacket, I think I came up about an inch and then I put seam allowance back on because I didn't want it to be too short. So instead of having to put separate seam allowance and tape it back on, I'm just going to only come up a ½ inch, and then I'll know that that other ½ inch is my seam allowance along the bottom edge here. So I'm going to go ahead and come up a ½ inch and then just take a ½ inch off and curve it into here. So now that I have this, you know, the tiny bit of cropping I'm doing to the Bolero here to make it a little bit shorter, I will go ahead and fold these closed again afterwards to get the correct shape going on here, but I'm going to cut out the space in between them for now, which, yes, does look ridiculous, but I'm going to go ahead and fold these and trim them again. So when folding these darts closed, you of course want this to look smooth because that's how it's going to look when it's finished. So when I go ahead and try and do this second one, there's like this jaggedy situation going on, so I'm going to tape a little bit of paper onto here, and then I will make it so that, because obviously if it looks smooth like this, that's well and dandy, but this will be closed eventually, so we need it to be smooth and in line here. So I'm going to tape a little bit of paper on here and fix this little section. I've just taped a little paper on here, and then I will close this dart, and then I will cut along here so that it is smooth even when my darts are closed, of course, because we want, I mean, this is kind of a funny line, but I'm not worried about it. It's going to be very subtle when it's on. So now, of course, it looks like this. There's a bit of a funky triangle situation going on here. But when these darts are closed, we have our smooth, curved bottom edge of the Bolero here. So we have the two darts, we have our curves in here, we've cropped it a little bit. I'm going to bring this down, I just have to slice that off. And then that's pretty much everything for the front I think I want to do here. Nothing else major going on, so now we can move on to the back. Ah, no, I do want to add a little bit of ease, basically from like the dart down, so I'm just going to tape on a little bit of scrap here, and then I'm just going to, from this dart point, just come out about a quarter of an inch maybe, and just ease that in just for a little bit more ease in the side seam of this Bolero. Alright, so with that little bit of ease there and that little bit here sliced off, this front is ready to go. So I'm going to use this, however, to make a couple of changes in the back, because of course we've made some changes here that need to match up with the back. So firstly, if this dart is closed, this has to match up along here, so we have to take that same ½ inch off the back here, and I'll just come straight to the center back with that. So I will go ahead and slice off the bottom of this, and then of course my back block pattern has 5/8 along the center back line for where a zipper gets to put in, and of course this doesn't have a zipper in the back, it's just smooth in the back, so I'm going to go ahead and slice off that ease so that this is now my center back that will be cut on the fold. So we can do that. I'm not going to change the dart on the back here at all, but I will have to change the armhole just like I did on the front too, so I'll have to come down that same ½ inch and ease that in here as well. First things first, I'm just going to take that ½ inch off so our side seam will match up with the front, and we have that a little bit cropped here. Again, I'm just going to fold the dart closed to do that, and I will slice along here. This comes to a little bit of a point, so I'll just curve this area a tiny bit so it's not so pointed and angled here. This is what I mean by curving this area. It just came to quite a point over the dart, and so I just eased a little bit of extra in there so that it's not so pointy when it's finished. I am going to add in the same little ½ inch of ease along the back side seam as well, just so again there's a little bit of room in the under the arm of the Bolero here along the body. So I'm just going to go ahead and slice that little excess off from that piece there, and then I will go ahead and take this down the ½ inch as before, like on the front as well. So again, you can just use a French curve for this kind of thing and just take off that ½ inch like I did on the front for the back armhole as well. The last thing I want to do on the back here is just make sure this neckline matches up with the front. So again, matching the shoulder seam up here, I want to make sure I mark this so that the front neckline and the back neckline match up. And I am actually just going to raise my back neckline again because I'm coming in along the shoulder seam, but I'm going to actually come up along the center back because the back on my bodice block is currently a little bit low. So I'm going to bring that up about an inch, and just curve that, and then the neckline will be done for the back. We've adjusted here, here, along here, taken off that excess, and so that's our last modification for the back of the Bolero here. So I've just gone ahead and drawn in arrows here because the center back is going to be cut on the fold, and I've just gone ahead and labeled this. I do date my patterns, like vaguely at least, that way I know, because for me, all my patterns are in kind of series of my sloper, so I want to know, like some of my older patterns were drafted on an old version of a sloper, and if it says 2016 on it, I know don't use it anymore. It's from my old sloper, so I want to be able to know, backdate my patterns and stuff like that, so I know it's like the latest version of my sloper was what was used to drape, or my block sloper, whatever, was used to drape these, not drape these, flat pattern these, so that way I will be able to keep in mind when things were created. So I've got the front and back ready. I'm going to go ahead and trace out a version of my sleeve here. So for the sleeves on this one, again, if you have a basic block sloper fitting shell sort of pattern, it should involve a sleeve with that as well. So I'm just using my basic standard block sleeve here. Usually they're long sleeved. I just have made a short one because most of the time I'm making short sleeve garments. So my card version is short, but you should have a long one. But I'm using the top of my sleeve pattern basically here. And I've just traced that, and I'm going to measure how long I want my sleeve from the center of the sleeve cap here. My arms from the top of my shoulder to my wrist are about 21.5, 22, in that zone long, how long my arms are. And I want these sleeves, I've just held a measuring tape along my arm basically, and I think I want them to be around 17 inches long, which is kind of like a longer 3/4, but I want the idea is if I could get some nice big 1930s gauntlet gloves to wear with this, that it would look fabulous. So it's kind of like a longer 3/4 or like a bracelet length almost sleeve. So I'm going to go ahead and make these 17 inches long. So from my shoulder cap here, I'm going to come down a 1/2 inch because of course a 1/2 inch of this is seam allowance. So coming down a 1/2 inch, and from that 1/2 inch loop, I'm going to come down to 17 inches. And then of course add another 1/2 inch for seam allowance down here at the bottom edge. So then I will go ahead and extend these lines as well, and then we can add in some flare to the end of this sleeve as well. Now today I will be making a bit of a bishop sleeve. This is what I'll be doing to this. So instead of adding puff at the instead of adding puff to the top of the sleeve, I'm adding fullness to the bottom of the sleeve, of course. So I'm going to bishop this a bit, and to do that you do just mark points in the midpoint from along the sleeve cap here, draw lines down the center, and open up darts of space a little bit more in the back than the front. So that is what I'm going to go ahead and do with this guy. Of course this is going to be shorter, but same idea. And then I'll control that fullness with some pleat-ish, dart-ish situations, and I will show you that as well. So I have taken my sleeve here. I've just, this is about 10 inches. It's like 9 3/4 or something like that on each side. It's not exactly the same, but whatever yours is, just find the middle of it, basically. And I've just drawn a line straight down to the end of the sleeve along that, and then I've cut along the center line as well. Again, we're just cutting, but not all the way through the point up there, so we can swing and decide how much fullness we want to add. I'm probably just going to add, let's say, do you want to do 2 inches? That seems like a lot. I think I'm just going to add 1.5 inches here at the bottom on each. And then what we'll do is 3 inches, I'll mark on the pattern 3 inches up from here. We will create these, and when we sew this, we will sew these bottom areas of fullness shut, and then this will puff out from higher up like is shown here. So again, we'll see that a lot better probably in the sewing of this. What I'm going to do is fill in these sections with paper here so that each of these is opened up 1.5 inches down here at the bottom, and I'll show you what that looks like. So that is what the sleeve looks like with 1.5 inches of fullness added in those splits. Now the idea is that about 3 inches up here, I will go ahead and sew the splits shut so that it has these little, it'll be like smooth down near the end of the sleeve, and then it will have these puffs that shoot out like in the drawing here. So that's the idea. So I'll have the little puffs along those 3 sections, and I might actually add in more. I might add in 2 more in here because the sleeve here at the cuff, if I extend the full width of this sleeve down like I did into a perfect square, the bottom edge of that is much longer, or the measurement of this is much bigger than the measurement around my arm. Yes, I have hairy arms. Thank you for pointing it out. Everyone always does. So it's much wider, so I can bring it in even further because my arm is slim in here. Obviously this fits around like the top of my arm, but my arm tapers, so I can taper the sleeve further as well too. So I'm going to split some sections in here, again using that 1.5 fullness idea. Something else I should add on to this pattern too before I forget is just to add this sort of like dip curve in the back. It just adds, you know, for blousing, it just adds a bit of a correct drape to have that shape along the back of the sleeve so that you have the correct billowy shape on your sleeve when you're done. So I've just gone ahead and taped a piece of pattern paper on here, and I'm just adding basically a 5/8 of an inch dip along the back side. This is the front side of the sleeve, this is the back side of the sleeve. Center back's down here, or center of the sleeve along my shoulder line is here. Underarm is the seam line. So I'm just gonna add a dip in the back and then just ease that in. Again, you don't want this to be any longer because then it won't match up with the other side. So you ease out from there and just create a little bit of a dip going on here before I add in those other sections here. And I will do all the markings along here and then I'll show you and talk you through those. So to draw these are going to be, again, little pleated sections, right? So to draw the one here and the one here in between these main sections, these sections are 4 inches across. So I'm just going to the center of that at 2 inches, then marking out a 3/4 of an inch from each side of that to get 1.5 inches to create another little friend in here. Again, this doesn't need to go all the way up or do anything else. We're just controlling extra fullness down here at the cuff area. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw them in the center of these sections and do that same situation. I will actually tape all these together so you can see what it looks like. It's not going to look very good in paper, of course, but you will get an idea of what the sleeve will look like. So now the bottom hem edge of my sleeve here has all these markings indicating the 3 inches up. So there's going to be a pleat here, 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 and here. So I'm going to go ahead and box pleat all of those and tape them together so you can see what that will look like in the end when it is done out of fabric. So here's what that looks like flat. I will go ahead and tape the side seams together so you can get an idea of what the full sleeve looks like. And here is the sleeve taped together. So you can see our cuff comes in and we have all this billowing out from there. So here I'll take it over to the dress form, but essentially, sorry for the backlighting, it should look something like this when it is on the body, on the form here. And of course this will have more drape to it because it will be fabric, not paper, of course. But that's the idea here. So after holding up that sleeve while it was all taped together to my body, I've decided that I'm going to come in along the underarm seam here. You know, it'll end like in my elbow crease. I'm just going to come up a little bit there and make that even a little bit shorter. So I'm just going to ease that into here so I don't have to mess with any of this that I already did. Ease this into here, and then I'll make the other side obviously match this length. I'm just folding the side that I just sliced a bit over and lining that up so I can make sure the seam is the same length on both sides. I will go ahead and ease that off as well. So that's my sleeve pattern for this one finished as well. So now the entire pattern for the Bolero is done. I'm going to be cutting this out of the fashion fabric and out of a lining. I'll be lining this whole Bolero as well. And then I'm going to try and see if I have some interfacing so I can at least interface the like front and back, hopefully. If not both, then at least the fronts, just so that this shoulder area stays nice. We'll see what I have in stock basically here. If I don't have anything, I don't have anything, whatever, I'm not going to worry about it. I may slip a slim shoulder pad in here, something small enough that it's not going to matter that I haven't adjusted for it. I don't usually use shoulder pads big enough that I adjust my pattern for them, by the way. I think all you would have to do with that is just to, like, see how I've added on this little bit of flare here on the side seam. I feel like you would just do the same here at the shoulder, but I'm not actually sure. I've never actually looked into how you add allowances or ease for a shoulder pad into your pattern, because I usually just slip them in my finished garment and nothing bad happens. So I've never had shoulder pad catastrophe happen to me. So I usually just add them after and nothing disastrous goes amiss. So that's probably what I'll be doing here as well. So on the original version of this skirt from my wardrobe here that I made a long time ago, I did a center back zipper and had a center back seam going on here. And this was actually back when I still railroaded my zippers instead of doing lapped zippers. So you know I sewed this one a long time ago because I always do lapped zippers now. But it seems to me that a better idea might be to put the zipper in the side on this one. So I think for this version I'll be doing the zipper in the side. That way we don't have to have this center back seam here. So we're going to do that. I'm going to start by taking, this is my basic block sloper skirt pattern, of course, like the straight pencil skirt pattern that comes with a fitting shell sloper bodice or dress block situation. And what I've done here is I've just taken a big piece of pattern paper and folded it so that I can cut, because this is half of my pattern that's cut on the fold, but I want to cut a full sheet of my pattern because we're going to be adding the flare to the one side. So I've just traced this along the fold so that I can open this up and I'll have a full pattern. So I'm going to go ahead, I've marked the darts here as well on this piece. You can see my dots for those. I'm just going to go ahead and cut this out and then open it up and then draw in those darts. Measuring a couple things on the old skirt here. Basically wanted to know how big of a flare this is. You see it's a big bit of circle. It's like a half circle basically that's sewn on here, or almost a half circle. Then I wanted to see how far down from the waist it starts, which is about 7 inches. So maybe 7 inches down from the waist is where our flare will begin. It's going to come out about 19 inches from here, which is about 20 inches if you're squaring it out. I'll show you in a second. And because this is only 7 inches, now I'm second guessing my idea of putting the zipper on this side. Can I put the zipper on the right hand side? Maybe I'll do that. Put the zipper on the right hand side. I think they're usually on the left hand side for women's garments. But like we can do whatever we want. There are no rules, honestly. I'm still thinking about my zippering. Anyway, we'll add the flare first and then I'll think about the zipper some more. I've got the tracing of the front of the pencil skirt here. So this is my center front line. That's where I had it folded. I've marked the darts up here. On the original version of the skirt, the flare is on the left-hand side. So I'll be attaching a piece of paper to the right-hand side here of my pattern because, of course, it gets flipped around when you wear it. So I'm going to be taping on a big piece of paper here so we can draw on our flare here. So I have my tracing of my front pencil skirt pattern here, and I've taped on a bunch of extra paper here. I've also squared off the hem continuing along here as well. Of course, it's not going to be straight here. It's going to be curved for our little curved section on the end of the skirt here. I'm not sure that the one in the original skirt is exactly a 45-degree angle, and again, I'm not taking a protractor out and doing the math on this one either. But what I've done is I've come down that same 7 inches from the waist and marked that point here. Again, it's a ½ inch in because of the seam allowance, but you can go from here too, it doesn't really matter. Because the flare doesn't have to be precise in any way, does it? So basically I'm going to come out about 45 degrees from the skirt here. You know, of course this would be a 90-degree situation if you wanted to have a full side, like half a circle skirt attached to the side of this. I'm just going to go ahead and do like a 45, and I'm just going to draw a line out here. So I've drawn in the 45-degree angle from out from the point where I want the flare to begin, basically. This big, huge half, like semicircle situation we're adding on to here. And then what I'm going to do is measure from this point here, where this flare begins along the cut edge of this, measure from that down to the hem, and for me that's 23.5. And then I'm going to measure along that line I just drew out 23.5, which finishes my skirt at 28.5 with that rest of the skirt up there, which is what I am looking for. And then from this point again, just like when you're doing like a circle skirt, so from here I'm going to measure down, my ruler is only 18 inches long, so 18, and then down to the 23.5. So I'm just going to add marks radiating out from here along from this point that are all 23.5, the same distance as this straight line here. I'm just, you know, trying to create a curve along here. Again, if my ruler was longer, this would be even better and easier. Alright, so I have just gone ahead and drawn in that curve connecting those dots here so that everything from that point is the same length for the skirt here. And then I've gone ahead and added on a little bit of extra. Now on the back, I'm just going to do this, I'll trace this section on the back, and I'm just going to do this first one we drew, but on the front I just want to add a little bit of extra, just hopefully so that that curve just rolls a little bit in the fold on the side where it drapes, and so I don't have a seam kind of showing I don't know how obvious it'll be in this fabric anyway, but I just think I want a little bit of extra in the fold on the, or in the kind of godet we're putting in here in the front. So I'm just going to put a little bit of extra on there. All I did there was just come out from that same point again, a little bit higher, again, 23.5 inches, and just curve that all into the hem here. And because we're coming out from this point here, that has seam allowance included, I'm thinking that this is having seam allowance included here too. That means that it's not precisely 7, but again, it doesn't really matter. Forgive me on the math not being exact. Again, this, you know, it's 45 degrees. I didn't measure that either. I'm just kind of guessing. But that's how design is done sometimes. You just guess and do whatever you like and you hope it works out. All right, so as you can see, this results in a very large pattern piece. Like if you would have to have quite wide fabric to lay this all out on your fabric in one piece like this. And here's the thing, I do have very wide fabric. The fabric I have for this project is a like suiting wool from Mood. It's like a nice Italian fabric, to be honest. So it's 60 width. This will fit on it, not a problem. However, if you have like 44 width fabric from Joann's or something like that, this is not going to be able to be cut all in one piece like this. So in that instance, you're going to actually have a seam like my original skirt does. So if you have 44 width fabric, you will have to cut out this flare as a separate piece like I did on this original skirt. And that is just fine. There's obviously no trouble having a seam here if you must have one. So you would just cut out your pencil skirt as normal and then sew this flare on into the seam here. Because I have wide fabric, I can do this all in one piece, and that is what I'm going to be doing today. In relation to this, deciding on the zipper placement for me. Because, again, I can cut my front and my back will look very similar, and my back wide like this, I am going to do so and then put a zipper in the side. Normally a side zipper on a women's skirt, pencil skirt like this would be on the left-hand side, but because this flare is on the left-hand side and I want to use a 9-inch zipper, not a 7-inch one, I'm going to go ahead and put it on the right-hand side. So I will add a little bit, I will cut this with extra seam allowance. I'm not going to add it onto this pattern. I'm just going to try and remember to cut it with a little bit of extra seam allowance here so that I can put a zipper in on this right-hand side of my skirt. Again, you wouldn't normally put a zipper in on the right-hand side, but there are no rules. And because I'm doing this skirt the same as I did, same look as the one I had made before that you guys have asked about, I'm going to keep the flare on the left and put the zipper on the right. Now, of course, I'm tracing the back skirt in this very same way along the fold again, because I'm going to have one big piece. So I don't need to cut it on the fold. It'll just be cut in one. So, because my back skirt, again, has 5/8 seam allowance on it, I'm going to hang this off the edge because I do not need seam allowance down the center back because I will be cutting it all in one big piece and putting a side zipper in instead of a center back zipper. Just like on the front, if you have a thinner width fabric, if your fabric isn't 60 inches wide, if you can't cut a huge piece out like that front piece looks, you can, of course, keep the center back seam and then cut out the back one small piece like this and then one with the huge flare on it. And that will, or even just cut your skirt like this and then cut the flare separately like you're doing on the front if you have that thinner width fabric. Luckily for me, I have a wide fabric and I just don't have to worry about anything to do with not having enough space. So, alright, so here's my skirt back, all traced out, mirrored, etc. I had to add on a little bit of hem stuff just because of how my pattern is, but it's fine, no worries. So I've just gone ahead and taped on more excess again. You'll notice that, you know, when we were doing the front, it was on the left-hand side. Now we're doing the back. It's on the left-hand side of the skirt, and therefore it was on the right-hand side of the pattern. And here on the back, because it's on the left-hand side of the skirt, it's on, or you know what I mean. You know what I mean? I think you know what I mean. So it's reversed. Basically, you want the flares to line up in the end. So we'll make sure when we're cutting, we talk about this again. But basically I'm going to draw the flare on here, and to do that, instead of drawing it from scratch again, I'm going to take our front pattern, and if we imagine that the dot side is like the right side of the fabric, you can see what I mean by having it on opposite sides of the patterns here. So when I line up this skirt here, basically this is right sides together, like I will when I sew them together later when it's made of fabric. I'm just going to go ahead and trace the flare for the back so that it is the same. And then again, I was talking about how I added this extra bit, so I'll actually fold this on the front one along our original line because I want the flare to be this much smaller on the back. I don't know if this is going to make a big difference in the end, but we're just going to try it because we can. Here is the back piece with the same flare traced on. Again, it's like 7.5 inches down. Flare is on. This is all the same length because of that curved hem, so it should hang all nicely. I probably will let this skirt hang overnight tonight so that any weird biasness gets pulled out of this and I can true it before I hem it later, but we'll get to that in the sewing portion. For now, here I have the back of the skirt and the front is already laying on the fabric out there. I'm going to label these and then I will show you how they fit on my big wide fabric so you get an idea. This is actually, the original skirt of this was actually inspired by Alexander McQueen garments, so I'm going to call this the McQueen side drape skirt for now because that's what inspired this, making this first original skirt, so might as well continue with the McQueen inspiration because, you know, he was a design god, let's be honest. Okay, so I know the lighting out here in the main room of our basement here is not the best, but I just wanted to give you an idea of how wide my fabric is. Not that I'm going to use this cutting layout, I haven't figured out how I want to puzzle everything onto my fabric yet, but I just want to show you how wide my fabric is, so there's no problem laying out my huge pattern pieces here. So these all fit on my fabric because of course I only need to cut one of the front and one of the back because the pattern piece that normally I would be cutting on the fold is laid out flat like so. Of course, to create the bolero, and hopefully if there's enough left over, I'm going to make one of my vests to match this as well, and then it'll be a 3-piece little suit situation. So let's hope I have enough fabric left over to eke out a little vest too. So I'm going to start actually playing around with this a little bit more and figure out the best cutting layout to cut out the bolero and this skirt here on this nice suiting. You can't tell how nice it is in this nasty lighting, but trust me, it's pretty. And then I will cut everything out and see about how I want to finish the seams on this one, if I want to do serge them or if I want to do rayon seam binding. We'll see how this fabric responds to the serger. If it's fine, then I'll probably just use that because I am a lazy bones, as we know. So I'm going to go grab a cup of coffee first, though, and rejuvenate and refresh, and then I'll come back to it. All right, here I am with no makeup, messy hair, and my pajamas down in the sewing room as usual, of course, cutting everything out. I cut out the skirt pieces on the floor where it was easier, and then I just moved the rest of the fabric onto the blue table so I didn't have to cut leaning over the floor. I did end up cutting out some fronts from some fusible interfacing that I had laying around. This is the last of my fusible interfacing, so I'll need to get some more interlinings and interfacings and stuff like that next time I'm at Joann's. But I was able to cut out the fronts interfacing, which is actually how the original bolero was made too, with just the front interfaced. So I felt comfortable doing it this way since it had worked out for me before. So I'm just going to go ahead and fuse my fusible interfacing fronts here. Fusible interfacing is not ideal, especially in like a tailoring application, really. It's very much a home sewer, quote unquote, kind of material, as opposed to doing like pad stitching and interlinings and really proper tailoring. But I've never learned how to do proper tailoring, so we're using fusible interfacing today. So I'm going to go ahead and trace my darts onto the back side of those front pieces here. Of course, we have 3 darts on each piece here. I'm just doing using colored pencil to poke through those dart points and then matching them up with tailor's chalk and my ruler here. Just going to pinch and pin those darts and then set them next to the machine. And then, of course, the back as well. Again, I've used an awl, like a pointy long pin, basically, to stick holes in the pattern piece so I can trace the dots with the colored pencil like this. And then again, just using my ruler and tailor's chalk to mark those darts. Some people don't mark their darts at all. I just do it because, you know, you guys like to tell me that I'm not lazy, and that's very kind of you, but I am quite a lazy seamstress, I promise. Here I have my sleeve piece, and so I, of course, have all these marks down here for the pleats. So here I am using that awl to poke through the pattern so I can mark those dots onto the back side of my pieces here. So I'm just using that colored pencil again to do that, and just mark where all those pleats need to be so I can pleat these sleeves to get that great puff going on down at the 3/4 cuff, as it were. The puff at the cuff, you know what I'm saying? I just pinned one of those pleats to start, and of course I have to do all that pleating on the lining here as well. This is actually a very nice silk lining fabric, and by that I mean very slippery and annoying to use, but I didn't have enough of either this fabric or the other lining fabric I had laying around to do the whole thing in one, so I am going to be lining the main body of the thing in poly and then the sleeves in silk here. And here I am at the machine sewing the first round of darts. It's all about darts, you guys. So again, I just start at the bigger end of the dart, and then I sew down and off the edge, basically, is how I sew my darts. So starting at the fat end there, and just tapering down to nothing, sewing off the edge, and then I tie the threads together at the dart point. Make sure you don't pull too hard because you don't want to do anything to the tension down here, but you just want to tie off those threads. So I'm just sewing all of my darts and tying them off here on the bodice lining, or Bolero back lining. And then here are my fronts. So I'm just sewing those darts. Again, feasible interfacing, also not the super best, or at least this weight of it. I wish I had a lighter weight in stock, but I didn't. Not the best when it comes to sewing the darts and ironing that all flat later on, but you work with what you got sometimes when you don't want to run to Joann's, you know? So here I am pinning my darts, making sure everything lines up properly before I go to sew them. I usually use 3 pins for a dart, again, starting at the large end, and then sewing off the edge, and then tying the dart shut. Lots and lots of darts. Most of sewing is darts. Practice your darts, and then you will be able to sew almost anything, you know? So you can see here that this is a gray polyester lining I had lying around that I'm using to line the main body of the Bolero, and then again I'm using that slippy silk stuff for the sleeves. But it's nice to have slippy silk inside your sleeves. It's just not very fun to sew with slippy silk, so, you know. I prefer to use a silk or rayon lining at all times, but I had some spare poly lining, so that's what got thrown into this body of this Bolero. So then I could go ahead and start doing all the pleating here on the sleeves. I'll just sew this first one that I had pinned. But basically I'm just matching up the points and then sewing, using a little bit of backstitch at the start, sewing along up to my other point that I had marked from the pattern, and then backstitch up there as well. And then just go along and sew all 5 pleats on each sleeve, basically. So that's what that looks like. A little bit of puff at the end there. So go ahead and pinch the next set of yellow marks together, basically, and make sure that I pin, when I pin through, that it hits the mark on the other side for my pattern. Knock my pin across the table for some reason. But I'm just matching up the points that I marked from my pattern, like so. And then I will sew all of these in this same way, these little 3-inch sections, 3-inch pleats, where I had marked them on the pattern. Easier to sew it in this suiting than it was to sew in that slippy lining. Alright, and here we are back over on the ironing table to press some of this. Here are the lining pieces for the sleeves with those pleats inside, or sewn in, basically. I am going to box pleat these, so basically iron it so half of, the excess is down on each side of the seam. But I didn't bother to do it very nicely here on the lining because, of course, it will never be seen. So I'm just going to press these down and mostly open, but not, and I'm not playing with it much. I'm not finessing the situation like I will on the outside version. So I'm just going to press these down. I will go ahead and just pin these side seams or underarm seams of these sleeve lining piece while I'm over here. Cannot speak. Just pinning those shut. And then for the actual sleeves, this is where I am being more particular. So cutting off all my excess threads here, just trimming all that down. And then I'm going to use this knitting needle to kind of get in to the sections that I've sewn in here, and then just pressing those into box pleats. So there's an even amount of excess on either side of where the seam is. And then I will actually go ahead and pin those down into place just while they cool from the iron. I find it's nice to pin what I've pressed sometimes so that it will cool where I want it to. It just helps things along. So I'm just going to open up all of these pleats and pin them like so, and then I'll actually sew a line of basting over the end of these pleats here where the pins are so that I can take the pins out, and just so that these pleats will stay nice. Just using a bit of a cloth here to help me pressing without getting any marks on this wool. Alright, back over on the machine, I'm just going to again sew in some basting stitches, just a large stitch length along those pleats to hold them down and nice, so that I can remove those pins as I go along and do other steps of the process here. Again, I do sew over my pins. I forgot to add a disclaimer earlier in the sewing portion. Yes, I sew over my pins. I have made like a blood pact with my sewing machine that it never hits pins. Knocking on wood now, of course, because now I've probably jinxed it. But I don't know what sage or weird mystic sewing thing is looking out for me, but I never really hit pins, so I always just sew over them. Very rarely will you see me remove pins, especially if I'm forgetting to look like I behave. I don't behave. I'm a rebel. I sew over my pins. You're not technically supposed to, but I'm a rule breaker. What can I say? Back over here on the ironing table, I'm just going to press the seams here open. I didn't bother finishing these seams on the lining, of course. I didn't serge them or even cut them with pinking shears or anything like that. It's going to end up on the inside of the garment and never be seen or receive much friction anyway, so I don't bother to finish my seams. I'm just pressing the lining here, including the darts. Although, if you watch this closely, you'll notice I press some of the darts in the correct direction, and then like here, I'm pressing them towards the side seam when I'm not supposed to. I don't know what was in my head this day, but I was pressing all kinds of willy-nilly. Here I'm pressing them correctly, towards the front. Darts towards the center front, towards the center back always. Here I am lining up the lining at the shoulder seam and the side seams for the Bolero, and I will set this next to the machine. I will go ahead and serge the raw edges of the fashion fabric, but that's mostly because it was like wanted to fray. As soon as I started working with it, I realized, oh no. So it wanted to fray really badly, so I ended up serging the edges of those. But of course I ironed everything first, so here I am pressing my darts on the outside or the fashion fabric. Here, this is where using fusible interfacing is less of a good idea. And again, here I am pressing the darts the wrong direction. What am I doing on this day? What happened? This is a couple days ago now, as I'm doing this voiceover, and I'm like watching myself make mistakes. It's hard. So I'm going to use this tailor's ham here, this little tough pillow, to kind of press the bust of this and give it a good steam, just so that everything lies nice and as curved as I can make it. And do that on this second one as well, the other side. Just press my darts. It's nice to have a tailor's ham like this. You can usually find them at sewing supply stores or fabric stores. It's just good for pressing over curves. And here is my back, where I'm pressing the darts correctly towards the center back. Good job, you weird child. But you can see this edges of this fabric are already starting to want to fray. So I took them straight over to the serger. This is a test piece to make sure it would work. And I just ran the raw edges of the fashion fabric. Even though they would be enclosed with the lining, the fabric was fraying as I was working with it, and I hate that kind of thing, so I just went ahead and ran them through the serger real fast. Here I am noticing that my darts are pressed in the wrong direction, so I'm finagling them so that they're in the correct direction towards the center front before I serge them down. Goodness. At least I realized that before I serge them going the wrong way. But just encasing all my raw edges here. You know, you don't have to, but sometimes when I'm working with a fabric that has a looser weave like this and wants to fray, I'd rather just serge it even though it'll be encased, because then I don't have to worry about the fabric falling apart on me while I work. So you can see me kind of tapping the fabric there. That's just to make sure that it's aligned properly again, because again, a loose weave fabric, it wants to stretch out and pull into weird directions. So you'll see me kind of like pat or tap the fabric sometimes. But I'm just pinning the side seams and the shoulder seams in the main portion of the bolero here as well. Again, just pressing that so that nothing's getting stretched or warped out of shape with this looser weave of wool. Just going to pin the underarm seam of the fashion fabric of the sleeve here as well, so I can set that next to the machine. Batch processing. You know, if you've been here a while, you know how I like to do things in batches. So here I am sewing that underarm seam. Again, just use my regular 1/2 inch seam allowance here. And again, sewing over my pins. Then I will sew my shoulder seams and my side seams, everything I just pinned basically. This is this next batch of sewing after that batch of pinning basically. It's just going back and forth between the machine table and the ironing board really. All right, back on the ironing board. So now I'm going to press open those seams that I just sewed, the seams I just sewed, you know. Go ahead and give this a press open, and you'll see I kind of hold it while it's warm as it cools. To be honest, I really just need a better iron. This one's like a $12 Target iron, like a very inexpensive iron. Maybe now that I have some lovely, lovely Patreons, thank you Patreons, maybe I'll be able to get a nicer iron. Maybe that'll be my equipment investment for next month, is a nice iron finally. But thank you for all of you who have come over onto Patreon to help support me and my projects. Maybe I'll get a nice new iron so I can stop. This one, the button for steam gets stuck, and I argue with that most of the time. So it would be nice to have one that was a little nicer. I hope you all are doing well, by the way. I'm kind of perpetually exhausted for some reason this year so far. I feel like I go to bed and I'm really, really tired. To be fair, sometimes I go to bed at like 4 a.m. But then I wake up and I'm still exhausted. So that's not really ideal. I think I need to get like a full 8 hours just to try it out and see what that's like. Could be a fun experiment. Here I'm just throwing a little bit of basting or like gathering stitches into the top of my sleeve caps. This is the sleeve lining here. But it's just using the largest stitch length and putting in a line of stitching along the top of the sleeve cap so that you can gather it just a tiny, tiny bit. You're not actually putting gathers in, but you're just scooching that area together a little bit so that the cap curves over at the top of the sleeve well. You'll kind of see what I mean in a second when I set them into the garment. So here's the lining. I will go ahead and pull on those stitches I just put in to just gather it a tiny bit. We don't want that actually to be gathers, but we just want it to be cupped a little bit at the top of the shoulder. And then I will go ahead and set those sleeves into the bolero lining here, pin that at the underarm seam together. So underarm seam to underarm seam here, and then I will just go around and pin everything. Now, if we were being better about this, I would have perhaps put notches on my patterns. Then I could have marked those in colored pencil and then matched them up here. At the very least, marked the center of the sleeve cap and then matched that up with the shoulder seam. But I didn't even bother this time. And that, I feel like I can get away with that only because I've been sewing for so very long. If you are newer to sewing, make sure, like if you're following an actual commercial pattern, that'll show you some notches that you have to match up, especially when doing things like setting in sleeves. But I don't bother to put notches in because I like, again, to live life on the edge, apparently. So this day I was being extra naughty and did not even mark the center of my sleeve. I just guesstimated it like a fool, but it all worked out in the end, so I guess it's fine. Just setting in my sleeves to the fashion fabric as well. Again, just having pulled that gathering stitch just a little bit to cup the top of the sleeve. You don't actually end up with any gathers doing this if you're doing it properly, I suppose. Lots of pins, lots of danger. Again, just cupping the top of that sleeve there, you can kind of see. All right, let's just sew those sleeves in here. I have my hand in between the two layers of fabric here on this side where we can see, and that's just to make sure that nothing gets pinched or gathered as I sew along the seam. Keep everything smooth in there. Just checking that sleeve cap to make sure everything went okay, and then I will sew this other one here. Same sort of idea, just keeping everything smooth. Nice, smooth, slightly cupped sleeve cap. That's what you want. And then I'll do the lining just the same, and then back over to the ironing board. All right, so I have my lining here, and I have my outside. So I'm going to put these two shells together here, basically. Put them right sides together, and then sew all the way around. So here I am putting the right side of the garment into the lining here. I think this is called bag lining. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called, when you bag line a garment. Basically, that's what I'm doing here. I'm just going to leave a space open here, actually, at the center back hem, so I can turn it all right side out in the end. But for now, I'm just going to start pinning all the way around, starting here by matching up the shoulder seams at the top of the neck. But then I will just pin all the way around, just leaving that only empty space down at the back bottom hem so that I can turn this all right side out after I sew it. But, you know, I did such great cinematography here with my head in the way, so we'll just skip back over to the machine here. All right, so I'm just gonna leave this space here blank where you can see no pins right next to the presser foot right now. But I'm just gonna sew all the way around the rest of the outside edge. There we are. Okay, back on the table, I am going to go ahead and clip my curves. I'm not going to break every rule today, so I'm clipping my curves at the neckline and then along the front as well, just a few clips in there, just so that my curves lie nicely when I go to iron them in a moment here, or press them, rather. So after that is done, I will go ahead and turn this right side out through this hole I left in the back. So I'm turning everything right side out. Looks like a mess to start with, but, you know, I'm just pulling everything through the space I left. So here's our Bolero, looking rather balloon-like and sad, so it's time to press this so that it looks nice. Look at how messy my freaking counter is. Oh my gosh. I got some vintage buttons that I haven't put away that are sitting there. For some reason, there's a bag of plastic straws. No one knows why. What's going on? But here I am just ironing the lining down on the inside, and you'll see me, I use some pins here just to hold it again while it cools into place. So I like to pin as I press so that it, I kind of want to say, so it dries nicely, but what I mean is that it cools nicely. So here in the back I have it pinned shut as well, and then I need to pin the sleeve cuffs. So I'm going to go ahead and pin, or like hem the sleeve cuff here, just by pinning it, and then I will do the same with the lining and pin that on top of this, and then I will hand sew all this finished. So I'm just coming inside the garment here and folding it down a 1/2 inch along the cuff, and I will do the same to the lining in just a moment here, you'll see. Some of you who keep track of these things may notice that this video is rather late this week. And that is because I was, doing 2 garments this time. Also because I was set back by the Super Bowl this last weekend. For those who are listening far in the future, it was the Super Bowl here in 2020, this last weekend before I have this video up. And that meant that there were people over at our house and my sewing room and my set and all that stuff was kind of inaccessible to me, so I was set a couple days behind. Now, you would think I would have planned ahead for this kind of thing, but being not a sports fan, I had no idea when the Super Bowl was, so it kind of got sprung on me, which is just poor planning on my part, but, you know, I don't know when the sports ball is, and I know nothing about sports. So my dad had some people over, and they were in our basement, which is where my studio is, and I couldn't really access it. Alright, so here I am just going to slip stitch the back that I had left open for turning this right side out closed now. I am just going to come in here from the inside so I hide my thread tails, and then I will just slip stitch this whole little area shut, and then I will do the same sort of thing for the sleeves, but just grabbing a little bit of lining and then grabbing a little bit of fashion fabric and just slipping the whole thing together. This is when it's a good time to find a nice podcast to listen to, doing the hand finishing. Oh, our heater has popped on. Great news. It's been actually quite cold and snowy here in Colorado the past few days. Not that I've been going outside, only when forced. I do actually have to go to the post office today, however. So we shall see. I'll have to go out there. So there is that seam basically sewn shut, and I will slip stitch the sleeve cuffs the same exact way, basically, just so that the lining is a little bit smaller than the fashion fabric, so that the lining is always curved inward and you don't see it from the outside ever, which is of course helped along by pressing it like so. And I will have to press this all flat again after it's done. I'm just going to slip stitch this sleeve cuff done on either side, and then the Bolero will be finished, basically. Well, not basically, it will be finished. You just give it a little fresh press, and the Bolero is done, and we can move on to making the skirt. Alright, so here I am. Different day. I've actually done my hair and makeup this day. What an idea. But here I am marking the darts for a skirt, of course. Again, most of sewing, I'm feeling more and more comfortable saying most of sewing is darts and pressing. Very little of it seems to be actually sewing. So I'm just going to pinch and pin my darts shut here. Alright, set that by the machine. Same with this piece here. Again, just marking my darts in the paper with an awl, and then using that punched hole to use my colored pencil to mark my darts, and then connecting the lines, this time with my colored pencil, because I was being frustrated with my tailor's chalk this day. I am just doing this skirt completely unlined. I haven't tried to make this style lined. I suppose you could, but when it comes to skirts, it has to be a very itchy wool before I'm like, okay, fine, I'll do a lining. Because most of the time I'll just be wearing a dress slip underneath anyway, or a skirt slip, so that's easier than having to sew in a lining, really. So here I am going to sew my darts on the skirt. That's right, we're back to sewing more darts. I'm telling you, it's a lot of darts. Start at the wide end and sew off the edge, just like I did when sewing the other ones on the Bolero, and then I will tie the darts shut, just like I did when sewing the Bolero. It's repetitive. Though I have been in a rather exhausted and therefore cozy mood this week, though I haven't been getting this sewing done as fast as I wanted to, I did watch a couple of films this week. So I watched The Irishman, finally, which I was like, man, this is going to be a long one. I'll watch half tonight, half tomorrow, but then I ended up liking it and stayed the course and watched the whole thing in one evening. I do quite like gangster films, and I like Scorsese films usually. I do wish, any of them were about women, or like the female characters got more than like a background shot, but they are good otherwise. At least they're not usually actively misogynistic. They're just leave women out. Interesting choice. All right, here we are back on the table. But to counteract that, The Irishman and all those dudes, I did watch Lady Bird finally this week as well, because now that I'm obsessed with Little Women, and I wanted to see Greta Gerwig's other film, and I quite enjoyed Lady Bird as well. So, balancing my films this week. But here I am, just giving this skirt a quick press, pressing my darts towards the center again. I hope you guys don't mind if I just get chatty in this voiceover, talking about films and how tired I am, etc. I should stop watching films and go to bed, is what the summary of that is. Here I am, just running these pieces through the serger as well, for the same reason I did the Bolero, because they wanted to fray on me, and pull out of shape, really. This helps keep the shape a little bit too. I am almost out of thread for this serger, so I'm going to have to get some more cones of thread next time I'm at the Joanne's all serged. I didn't bother serging the hem, of course, because that's going to be encased in bias tape in a minute. So here I am lining up the side of the skirt with the drape here. So I'm just going to sew this side seam first, because of course the other side is getting the zipper and therefore has more things going on. But this one, we just need to sew it together. There we go. Just make sure everything is lined up and as it should be, basically. And then I'll go ahead and sew that over here. Just again, using my same 1/2 inch seam allowance and small stitch length, like I would normally. Do let me know perhaps what your favorite film you've watched recently has been in the comments below, because I quite like films and I'm always looking for more interesting ones to watch. So feel free to give me your recommendations in the comments. I think next I want to watch Moonlight, because I've still never seen Moonlight, and apparently I'm on a very cinema kick here, watching actually acclaimed films, as it were. But I never saw Moonlight, and I want to watch Booksmart. I haven't seen either of those yet, so those are kind of next on my list. But here I am just pressing that seam open, naturally. Now, you may think, where that flare attaches to the skirt, like that 7.5 inches down, where the flare starts, that would be a perfect place to put a clip. It's not a curve, it's a corner, but you would normally clip your corner. But because this fabric is such a loose weave, I don't want it to fray and pull apart there. And funny enough, this drapes just fine without cutting that area. So again, I'm going to be a rebel and I'm not going to clip that corner. So apologies, but I think in the end you'll agree that it lays just fine without having done so. And this is just going to be more structurally sound, so I'm not going to bother. Waiting for that to cool, kind of, again, pressing and waiting for it to cool. It's kind of what I do when I curl my hair as well. I will curl it with, when I do a hot set with my hair, I'll curl it with a curling iron and then I'll pin it in place to cool. I'll roll the curl back up to my head and pin it in place to cool. Same kind of idea here. I like to press my seams open and then hold them while they return to normal temperature so that the pressing stays, I guess. It is kind of warm to do with your hands. You can burn your hand almost sometimes, but who needs palms, skin cells, whatever. All right, so for the other side seam, this is the straight one, the more regular pencil skirt side seam here, where I will be putting in my zipper. So I'm just going to pin the whole thing shut, and yes, you can see I keep my pins in my mouth. Oh, we have some attacking taffeta. Go away. You're for the next project. Here I am again, kind of patting and tapping the fabric so that everything is aligned and doesn't warp out of shape, as it is wanting to do here. But again, I'm just pinning this whole seam shut, and then I will measure using the zipper how far down I want to just baste, and then from the rest of the zipper area down, I will sew the seam as usual. So, grab my zipper, which has fallen onto the floor here. I'm just going to measure how long from the waist down I need to just do basting stitches. Basically sew with a larger stitch length. So I'm just kind of measuring that using the zipper itself to see how long I want to go. I'm going to move that down a little bit further. And I'm just going to put 2 pins very close together to mark that area for myself when I get over to the machine. So I'm just going to baste this area where the zipper will go. And then from there down, I will actually sew the seam with a regular stitch length. So over here on the machine, I'm going to go ahead and turn that stitch length up to 4, as large as my machine goes, and go ahead and sew down to those 2 pins I just put in, and then completely finish, come off the machine, and come back on to sew the actual side seam here using my smaller stitch length. Alright, so now I can press this seam open, and that's why I put the basting in at the top where the zipper will go, is so that I can press the area. And I actually did put my tailor's ham in here because it's a curved seam, so I'm just using that to help me along. But I like to have my basting stitches in the seam where my zipper will go and then iron it and then use And then I'll be using the pressed edge as a guide as I set the zipper in. So I'm just pulling those basting stitches out now that I have that all pressed. Don't need that basting thread anymore. I'll tell you what, I do need some chapstick though. Alright, so here I am just lining up this is the back side of the skirt right next to the zipper teeth along that pressed edge here that I just pressed into the fabric thanks to that stitching line. And so I'm starting at the bottom of the zipper here, and I'm stitching maybe 1/8 of an inch from the zipper teeth just down into that fabric, just as close as I can get, really. I could put a zipper foot on to the presser foot, but I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna use the regular one because it's me. And then I will remove these pins as I go, by the way. These are thinner glass-headed pins that I use for zippers. Alright, and so for the other side, as the name would suggest, for a lapped zipper, it kind of laps over the edge here. So I'm just going to fold this side. Well, I'm going to move onto the other side of the camera and move the camera out of my way a little bit. So I'm just going to lap this side down. And of course this is a little bit more annoying than usual because usually I do this down the center back and it's not curved like this. But this is along the side seam over my hips, so this area is curved, so it's a little bit more irritating than usual, but it's alright. But I'm just lapping the zipper right over the teeth, or lapping this fold right over the teeth of the zipper here, and then I will sew it down so that we have this little flap that covers the zipper in the end. This is just how I do my zippers. I figured I'd go into a little bit more detail than I sometimes usually do. Sometimes I skip over steps in this process, and I thought I would be a little more detailed this time. For those who are like, how do you do your zippers, you weirdo? Alright, starting at the bottom of the zipper again, I'm lining up my presser foot, the edge of the presser foot here, again, just the regular presser foot, with the edge of the zipper teeth underneath this lapped area. So I'm kind of doing it by feel. I have the presser foot like butted up against the zipper teeth underneath. And that is my guide as I sew along here. Again, sewing over these pins once again. When I get to the end of a zipper here, you'll notice that I leave the needle down into the fabric, and then I kind of take some of these pins out so I'll be able to have maneuvering space. And then I will lift the presser foot in a second here. How slow is real time, by the way? Jeez. Then I will lift the presser foot and then unzip the zipper so that I can get in there without that zipper pull in my way. Put the zipper foot, or put the presser foot back down, and sew the rest of the zipper to my garment. Lift the needle out of the way, and our zipper is in. Hooray! We did it, we survived. Time for a waistband. You'll notice I never cut like a pattern piece for my waistbands. I always just cut a 3-inch wide, 32-inch long strip of fabric. And then this time I have interfaced it with some scraps of interfacing here. And then this white tape you see zigzagged onto there is a twill tape, a thin twill tape. Just because this fabric has some give to it and it's not very structurally sound, I wanted to give it something a little bit more structurally sound here at the waist. So I have zigzag basted a stay tape, a twill tape into this zipper, or into the zipper, gosh, into this waistband. I'm losing my mind, guys. I need to have a nap. So I am just marking the center on this as well, but you can remove those zigzag stitches after this is sewn on, basically. It's kind of just basting the twill tape in place while I do the rest of this waistband. Gosh, if I can speak today. All right. Look, Esposito, you can do this. I'm going to give past me some encouragement. All right, I'm just going to pin that waistband onto my skirt here. I'm just making sure that it does come to like 30 inches. So I'm making sure that the center of that waistband and the side seam is at 15 so that my finished skirt has a 30-inch waist. Just pinning that all onto the waistband so that it gets sewn onto the skirt over that twill tape, because we need that structure of the twill tape in this waist seam. But yeah, I never bother with making waistband pattern pieces. Just take this over to the machine here and go ahead and sew this on. Hopefully with the correct setting of the machine here. Obviously I was needing to mess with it. There we go. Again, sewing over my pins. Living on the edge. Never gets old. And here I am. And here I am back on the ironing table. I'm just going to press the top edge of this waistband down a 1/2 inch. Great cinematography going on here. This over the shoulder, mostly blocked shot. Great. So I'm just going to go ahead and fold the end of this down over and fold my waistband in half. And then start pinning this all down. So I'll just go ahead and pin the waistband smooth and down and tucked in here at the end. Eventually this is where my skirt hook will go, of course. And I am just going to pin this all down over the seam. And now a lot of times you'll be told to stitch in the ditch on the other side. So like stitch over the seam to stitch this inside part down. But I just like to do this by hand. So I'll pin everything down in place like this all along the waistband. And then I will slip stitch the inner part of the waistband down, or like this half of the waistband down along the inside. I just do it by hand. It's what I always do. And it is what I will do again today. Take that over to my desk. Flannel pajamas now. Have some more thread here. Let's see, what do we got on this messy desk? We got some jewelry making supplies, chapstick, a couple of ColourPop lipsticks. That drawstring bag is a camera lens, lots of thread, water, which is a surprise because I do not stay hydrated. Might be part of why I'm always so exhausted. And then behind that, yeah, jewelry making tools. So lots going on the desk here. Also that gaming keyboard because I'm such a huge gamer, you know. And by that I mean I play The Sims a couple of times a month. Mostly just decorating cute houses because I can't have a cute house in real life. So I do interior decorating in The Sims. I don't ever really play The Sims for the gameplay. But I just like building cute houses in The Sims. So, you know, there's that. But here I am just finishing sewing the waistband down on the inside with mostly slip stitching this done, but just like any hand stitch I need. You know, I don't really, you know me and the names of hand stitches. Not here for it. I sew it until it looks pretty and finished. That is that. But the important thing here when doing hand stitching waistband down, hand stitching hems down, anything really, is keeping in mind tension. So sometimes I'll pull the thread too much and it's like almost gathering it. And then I will pull it back out, you can see here, so that the tension is just where I want it. So it's not, the thread isn't pulled too tight and it's not too loose in here either. So that's kind of the most important thing to remember, is not pulling too tightly when you're doing this. All right, so I did let that hang on my dress form overnight, the skirt, because I knew that this side where the bias was along the flare was going to pull out or like stretch. So it did. As you can see, it stretched about 1 inch along that side seam. And here I am. I'm going to measure them because it makes me nervous cutting that much off. So basically I'm measuring the straight side of my skirt. And I'm like, all right, like 29 inches finished with the waistband. So I'm kind of making sure that this side is also 29 inches. And it is. So I need to cut off that little bit. But I just like to reassure myself because I get nervous. So here I am just going to cut along these pins so I can straighten my hem over here. Most fabrics will stretch along the bias unless they're very tightly woven, and this is a quite loosely woven fabric, so I did anticipate this one to stretch, and I'm glad I let it hang overnight. So just retrim that area, and then I can go ahead and hem this skirt. I am going to just use some bias tape to hem this. I normally hem with bias here on the channel. You'll see me do it all the time, usually with cotton bias tape like this, although this, I'm not using cotton bias tape for this project because I want to, but more out of necessity, again, because I didn't have anything else in stock in my stash. Normally for something like this, out of a wool suiting fabric or any like nicer fabric, I would like to use like a silk fabric as the bias tape. I will make bias tape out of a silk fabric, usually a lightweight silk taffeta I really like for this, or a silk organza, but I did not have either of those fabrics easily accessible to me for this project. I didn't want to put it on hold any more than it already was, so I went ahead and just used cotton bias tape because that's what I had around. But in an ideal world, I would have used like a lightweight silk taffeta or something like that, just for a little bit more movement in this drape area, because this cotton, of course, is a little bit stiff, but which makes it perfect for cotton sateen or anything where you want a little bit more stiffness in the hem. But for this, it is a little bit on the stiff side, unfortunately. So, but that's all right. We're going to make it work, you know? So I'm just pitting this on right sides together, the bias tape along the outside edge of the hem here. This is on the outside of the garment, and I will sew that with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. And then I will go ahead and fold the bias tape onto the inside and press that down. Again, just leaving a little bit of a curl of the edge there. So just curving that bias tape. Again, cinematography, A++, basically the back of my arm. I know that's what you're here to see. And my Hogwarts t-shirt. But I'm just folding that bias tape onto the inside now, especially along that curved edge, pressing it all nicely and pinning it in place. And then I will go, of course, hand stitch this hem down. Here I am back at my desk, and I will just hand stitch this hem. Again, I'm just using a slip stitch, but just a long and short version. Tiny stitches on the fashion fabric, and then long stitches into the bias tape. On the other side, I will turn this in a second here. You can kind of see the stitches until I pull them, and then they kind of disappear, which is fun. So you can see where the stitches are, and then I pull it tight and then like zhuzh it around a little bit. They start to disappear, which is always nice. So I'll just go ahead and finish the hem on this one. And then the last thing I did here was I actually took the area where this is the point that I said I did not clip, basically. This is the outside of that area, where the drape starts from the hip of the skirt. And I just put this little tuck, folding some of the fabric forward in this area, just so that most of the time the drape would hang in a sort of forward motion. So this is just a tiny little tuck that I put on the outside of the skirt. It's really hard to describe, but hopefully you can kind of get what I mean. Where the drape starts on the side of the skirt, I just put this little tuck in here, and I just backstitched this down to the seam allowance. I'm too zoomed in, honestly, but here I am just like backstitching a couple of stitches to hold a little bit of that flare forward. You don't really see this when the skirt is on. No one would really know it's there except for you, or me in this case. But it just helps the drape hang properly when you're wearing the skirt. So, and that's the last step on this. And then this skirt is finished, and the bolero is finished, and this new little suit set is done. Hooray. A 1930s project. We haven't done anything 30s, I don't think, on the channel yet, so hooray for the 30s. Here is the finished little suit set. I call this a suit. I mean, it's out of suiting wool. It's a set. It's a jacket and a skirt. To me, that counts as a suit, no? I mean, we didn't use any traditional tailoring techniques or anything like that in making this suit, and that's because I've never learned how to do that. I would love to take a, real, legit tailoring class someday, but I'm just not there yet, so there's no inner lining or crazy things going on. This actually doesn't even have a shoulder pad in it. I could have done something to facilitate that, but I didn't even bother this time because it's not really a 40s suit, it's more of a 30s thing, so I feel I can get away with having a softer shoulder, as it were. So that is how I draft boleros for my basic bodice block pattern and how I do this side drape version of a pencil skirt. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing this project today. Do let me know what other kinds of things you are interested in seeing in the comments below, projects for the upcoming year. You know, I'm sort of in my planning stages for the year, so let me know what kinds of things you would like to see. Even link me to Pinterest, you know, show me exactly what you are after, and I'll see if I can't add some of your ideas into my schedule for the year. And thank you, as always, for joining me here on the channel today. I'll see you again soon. Bye.